Welcome back. Thanks very much for staying with us here at Sun News. Whether or not Canada should implement a carbon tax, that's a big discussion. And it depends on what part of the country you're in. Some support, some not so much. Well, someone who's recently written about that, Candice Malcolm, the Ontario director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joins me. The headline in your piece, carbon tax is not a solution for Ontario's economy. I mentioned Canada. I have concerns about what Justin Trudeau is going to do if he does become Prime Minister. Specifically on the Ontario front, though, we've seen other jurisdictions in our country implement it. Quebec, BC. What's been the impact, and why should Ontario just say no?
Well, I think for Ontario, it really is the wrong solution. There's been some suggestions that Ontario could use it as a new revenue tool. We all know that Ontario's finances and their economy is in a mess. So the idea that you could slap on a new carbon tax and that would help to reduce the deficit. As you mentioned, they brought it in British Columbia, but the government made it quasi or somewhat revenue neutral. So they introduced a new carbon tax, but they also reduced other taxes, corporate taxes and income taxes, to make it a little easier on folks in BC. It's not perfect. It's not revenue neutral to most people. Certain people like farmers, someone who owns a grocery store, they're going to get taxed a lot more. Plus it raised gas taxes. So the jury's still sort of out in British Columbia. The economy has done a little bit worse. The carbon emission hasn't really gone down any faster than the rest of the country. And in Ontario, I think it would be a devastating tax to the economy. We already face very high energy prices because of the Green Energy Act, because of the canceled gas plants and other scandals. This would get slapped on top of that.
And not to mention, we can add one more thing in there. It's a Toronto Sun editorial today and a Toronto Star editorial, interestingly enough, that the pensions that we're paying for workers at Ontario Power Gen and Hydro One, we're paying for their gold-plated pensions, $5 for every $1 the employees putting in, and we know we're going to have to pay for that. So that is what concerns me about this. And I bring that up for that specific purpose, because this was a report done by a guy who used to run the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. Jim Leach is his name. Candice, right. He knows what he's talking about. If we have these long-term unfunded liabilities, not only just in the energy sector, but in other parts of government at provincial level, wouldn't a government like Kathleen Wynne, who claims to be clean and green and all of these things, do you see her trying to sell it in that regard and then trying to pay off some of that unfunded liability? Or am I giving her an idea and I should stop talking?
Maybe you should stop. I think you can kind of see the political spin doctors saying, hey, it's a green carbon tax. We're going to continue our crusade to be the cleanest and greenest province. But exactly like you mentioned, the pension, the report comes out kind of funny. The report was dated in March, and yet the government waited and released it on a Friday afternoon right before the long weekend. So a lot was hidden in there. And what Jim Leach essentially said was that it was going to be taxpayers and ratepayers that were going to be on the hook. OPG, Ontario Power Generation, has an unfunded liability in their pension of over $500 million. So that's a huge hole to be in. And what Jim Leach said was that if things weren't turned around drastically, it would be ratepayers. So in Ontario, again, we're already facing, we pay double the electricity rates as a lot of our neighbors. We pay higher taxes or higher energy rates because of the Green Energy Act, and a carbon tax would just make that a lot worse.
What if they were attempting to try to make the sale in terms of the so-called revenue neutrality? We know that long-term that never works out, because eventually we're just going to continue to pay more. They'll throw something else in the mix. And frankly, I have no confidence that this government would say to the public, we're going to reduce income, corporate, small business taxes by X amount and therefore free up that money. But we're becoming energy poor in this province. And what I mean by that is our bottom line, our individual household income is going more and more and more to pay for these so-called green energy schemes that the Liberals in Ontario have come up with. And that's what scares me about a carbon tax. You can spin it and rationalize it, pull on the heartstrings of those who feel guilty about the environment and things like that. But we know it's not going to be the magic bullet, as it were.
Right. Well, we know, but the problem, like you're saying, is
Ontarians just re-elected them.
it can be sold that way, and I think that other jurisdictions around the world have come across that exact same situation. Australia recently got rid of their carbon tax. It was terribly unpopular. People hated it. Even though people in Australia care about the environment, they care about climate change, they didn't really see the carbon tax actually fixing the problem. They saw a lot of loopholes and a lot of people winning and other people losing. So, it didn't really work there. And again, in an economic model, maybe it can work, but in reality, we know they're not going to eliminate corporate taxes or income taxes anytime soon in this province. So really what it would be in Ontario is just tacking another tax on top of an already very heavily taxed energy sector.